Welcome to this 13th episode of the Shift English podcast. In the last episode, we were talking about the story of a dramatic shipwreck, and this episode is a continuation of that story. So, I would recommend listening to the last episode before this one. But just for a quick recap, which means a short summary of what happened before, we were telling the story taken from a book about a couple sailing across the Pacific Ocean. The episode followed their journey at sea and the events leading up to a sudden and catastrophic shipwreck. During the night, their boat was struck by a whale. It was hit by a whale, leaving them stranded in the middle of the ocean. Stranded because they had no one around to help them, and they had no radio to call for help. The episode focused on the shock of the collision and the immediate aftermath, or the situation they suddenly found themselves in. There are several books that recount their story, but the one I prefer is by Sophie Elmhirst and is called A Marriage at Sea. I think her book does an especially good job at telling us the background of Maurice and Maralyn, the couple in the story. In this episode, the story continues, but this time the focus is on what happens after. In the last episode, it was Maurice, the husband, who was the person most dominant in the story, the part when things were going well. But when things fell apart, when all the careful preparation was ruined, destroyed by the whale, it's the wife Maralyn who steps up. It is her ability to improvise and stay optimistic that becomes most important. So, in this episode, we look more at Maralyn and how she survived emotionally and mentally after the shipwreck. Losing everything at sea did not end her story. Instead, it showed her resilience, her ability to keep going, adapt, and rebuild her life after extreme loss. I have a confession to make. I realize I made a mistake in the last episode. Rereading the book while making these episodes, I realized the couple actually spent 118 days floating around in their little lifeboat after their sailboat sank, not 117 days like I initially thought. Just one day of difference, but I imagine when you are starving and scared in the middle of the ocean, one day would feel pretty long. But anyway, to recount what happened to the couple after the moment the whale put a hole in their sailboat. After the collision, Maralyn and Maurice worked quickly. They transferred what they could into an inflated life raft and a small dinghy, salvaging food, a compass, and a few essential supplies. Then they watched their sailboat, called Maralyn, slowly sink beneath the surface of the ocean. Just real quick, a dinghy is like a small plastic boat, definitely not made for being on the open ocean. And a compass is the device that tells you which way is north, south, east, and west. From that moment on, survival depended on Maralyn's ability to stay focused. Panic would change nothing. Action, routine, and control were the only things she had left. She organized their supplies and helped establish a way of living on the raft. They collected rainwater whenever they could. When their limited food ran out, Maralyn adapted. Together, they began catching fish, seabirds, and turtles, sometimes by hand, sometimes using safety pins bent into hooks. Safety pins are those little metal pins used to connect cloth material together, usually temporarily. They have a sharp point which is covered to make sure they don't poke you. As the days passed, they drifted across the vast Pacific Ocean. On 7 separate occasions, they saw ships in the distance. Each time, hope surged. Each time, it collapsed. Their signal flares failed or didn't get seen, and their emergency kit did not include a signaling mirror. They could see help, but they could not reach it. The frustration was intense. To be visible, yet unheard. 7 times. I can understand why that must have been so frustrating. To know that rescue was close, but slipping away again and again. In their journal, I remember they wrote that after a while, they wished not to see any more boats because they knew they wouldn't get rescued by them, and it just disturbed their sense of peace, their sense of acceptance. The raft itself began to fall apart and needed constant reinflation. It ended up with a hole in it due to a fishing accident, and their only option was to constantly be pumping it back by hand, to be pumping it up each time it looked deflated. which meant they had to take turns day and night to keep pumping their boat up. Early on, they read books and played cards to stay mentally strong. But over time, malnutrition weakened their bodies. Painful sores developed from constant friction and wet conditions on the boat. They endured violent storms, and at one point, their boat got overturned and Maralyn nearly drowned. Because, yes, guess what? On top of everything, Maralyn didn't know how to swim. This blows my mind. Can you imagine how that must have felt? You are on this inflatable raft that is so thin. There is just the thinnest material separating you from the depths of the deepest ocean in the world. And even worse, that inflatable boat is also sinking. And this whole time, you know that if for any reason you end up in the water, you are screwed because you can't swim. English people love to say you are screwed to mean you are in big trouble with no way out. Despite all of this, the couple held on. They continued to survive. At one point, Maurice got very sick, and it looked like he would die. And then, against the odds, he got better. And Maralyn had even started to catch sharks by her bare hands, which is hard for me to imagine how, or to imagine the image of this happening. But apparently, she would catch these smallish sharks by their tail and swing them on board. Crazy. And then after drifting nearly 1,500 miles, or 2,400 kilometers, rescue finally came. On 30th of June 1973, the South Korean fishing vessel called Wilmy 306 spotted their raft after initially passing by and then turning back. As you can imagine, the crew of the Korean boat were shocked to find the couple in the middle of the ocean, and even more shocked to learn how long the couple had been lost at sea, and to see how thin the couple were. They were as thin as skeletons. When Maralyn and Maurice were brought aboard, they were barely able to stand, having lost around 40 pounds, 18 kilograms, each. They were taken to Honolulu, Hawaii, alive after more than 3 months at sea. So that's the mostly factual details of their story. The facts on how they survived. But in the background is their personal approach and mentality in the aftermath of the shipwreck. Maurice had a lot of guilt that they were shipwrecked. He felt like he had failed in his role as captain. And furthermore, he felt like their chances of being rescued were nearly zero. Maralyn, on the other hand, was concentrated on the tasks at hand. She was concentrated on the things that needed to be done each day. And at the same time, she really believed they would be rescued eventually. These two different mindsets led to different responses to their situation. Maurice grew increasingly despondent, his energy faded, and hope became harder to hold on to. Long periods of hunger, pain, and disappointment wore him down. He was often quiet and moody. Maralyn, however, responded in a different way. She chose to focus on what could still be done, and this positivity meant she was willing to try new, creative ideas. There is a funny story where they managed to catch 2 turtles alive. Maralyn had the quite ingenious idea to attach the 2 turtles to their boat in the idea and hope that the turtles would pull the raft somewhere that they could be seen and rescued more easily. Honestly, great idea. But the problem was that the 2 turtles pulled in different directions, so they didn't really go anywhere. I don't know why they didn't just release one of the turtles. So, anyway, this particular idea didn't really work out, but her optimism was essential to the couple's survival. It was practical. There is an interesting quote by Maurice himself, who said to the BBC in an interview after their experience, "I have always put the credit down to Maralyn, that she saved me, that I wouldn't have survived at all on my own, or if she was relying on me to save her, she wouldn't have had a very good outcome." So essentially, he is recognizing that Maralyn, his wife, was the one that kept them going until they were rescued, in both a practical and emotional sense. Believing in survival gave her the strength to keep acting, to gather water, pump up the raft, catch the fish, and face each new day, especially when Maurice was sick and unable to help. She was the one doing nearly 100% of the work to keep them both alive. Following their shipwreck, the couple became quite famous for a little while. Across the world, People wanted to know more about their story, to know how they managed to survive for so long. All the attention came as a big surprise and change of speed for the couple, considering they were already reserved before their adventure, meaning they were already quiet and introverted, and then they spent 3 months totally alone on the ocean with no contact with anyone. So it was a bit of a shock to them to be in front of cameras and lots of people. I got the feeling they felt uneasy and uncomfortable with all the attention. But they had a mission, they had an objective that kept them going. Can you guess what it is? It was to build a brand new sailboat and recommence a new sailing adventure, preferably without the whale this time. I am impressed that they weren't too scared to go sailing again. And that's exactly what they did. Despite the uncomfortable media attention, they decided to use it to get the money for their new dream, the sailboat Maralyn 2. They wrote a book and also sold the exclusive rights to their story to a newspaper in the UK. These two things especially helped them get the money they needed. They weren't rich, but they were following their dream again. And I am happy to report that their second trip went well. Their boat didn't sink, and they both lived for many more years after their adventure. I hope you enjoyed hearing about their story. The book by Sophie Elmhirst isn't written at a level too difficult. I think if you are around upper B1 or B2 level, you would do just fine with it. And as I said, it is well written, not just a simple adventure book. There is a lot more to the personal story of Maurice and Maralyn in it. Next week, I want to change to a different topic and do an episode on the origins of the term redneck in the USA. For anyone unfamiliar, a redneck is an informal term used in the USA to describe someone who is seen as working class, often from a rural area, especially in the southern or central parts of the country. Usually nowadays, it is used in an unkind, derogatory kind of way, but there is an interesting history behind this term I wanted to explore with you. So until then, I hope you have a lovely week.